I just want to say good evening to everyone again and welcome you to your webinar, Understanding the Fair Tax. My name is Kerry Bowers, and I will be your host this evening, standing in for your regular hosts, Mark Maneri and Larry Walters. Mark and Larry had to be away to tend to other matters this evening, but they will be back with you on the 22nd of January, which will resume the regularly scheduled fourth Thursday of the month webinar, beginning at 8 p.m. Standard Time. So please mark your calendars for that event. Note, too, that there will not be a webinar in December. Plenty of time then between turkey and shopping to get out and conduct your own home study about the fair tax, and then come back in January with whatever questions you may still have for Mark and Larry's response. Keeping with the standard format, our webinar tonight will be presented in two segments. The first, a short presentation covering the basics of the fair tax, followed by a short question and answer period. And the second segment will be a short presentation comparing the fair tax to a generic flat income tax, which again will be followed with a question period that we will continue until our time expires for the evening. Now, those wanting to ask a question tonight may use one of two formats to do so. If you have speakers and a microphone or a headset with a mic, you can select the little hand up icon on your webinar dashboard, and that will let me know that you have a question. And at the appropriate time to address your question, then I will unmute your microphone and address you by name, and then invite you to share your question with the audience. Those without a microphone or listening in on telephone, you may type a question to me through the question tab that you will actually see there, I believe, at the bottom of your menu box. Now, due to the large volume of attendees that we do have tonight, the potential for a large number of questions, I want to start right out and apologize ahead of time if we do not get to your question, but please hold on to it. And if you do not get an answer in the interim, bring it back to the next webinar, and Larry and Mark will be happy to address that. And last, before we begin, I want to say you will be able to view a copy of this webinar through the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association's website at FL, that's the abbreviation for Florida, fftea.webinars.org. Now, please give Larry a few days to get it posted before you go start looking for it. And then once you have given him a little bit of time to get that posted, then you can access it by going to the home page at floridafairtax.org and selecting the graphic titled Webinars, where you can gain access to the archive of previous webinars that have been presented by our duo there of Larry and Mark, amongst other webinar information that you may find out there has been presented in the past. And now I think that completes our introductory details, so let's look at getting started. And we'll take and bring our screen back up, and you should have the full screen now. What we'll be talking about this evening is the fair tax. Now imagine, if you will, never again having your earned income seized for federal income and payroll taxes. Never again choosing a savings or investment program based on federal tax consequences. Or never again collecting sales, donations, or other financial receipts for federal tax filing purposes. Never again filing an individual federal income tax return, or perhaps more importantly to many, never again having to pay someone to file for you. And then never again fearing your government because you do not understand your tax obligations. Imagine, too, paying your federal taxes as a private individual to be as simple and voluntary as, one, purchasing any new product or service, and two, annually and, more importantly, voluntarily registering each member of your family with their Social Security number in order that you receive a monthly family consumption allowance. Now, how is that possible? Well, it's made possible by something that probably all of us online tonight know as the fair tax. The fair tax is the result of the organization Americans for Fair Taxation putting together a $20 million donated investment into tax research and analysis. And what they looked at was to try to find out what the people want and what businesses want in both individual and business tax collection systems. This particular system that they came up with, that we now know as the FairTax, has been supported by a number of university and very well-known business economists, including Nobel laureate Vernon L. Smith. One of the important things, too, that we find about the FairTax is that it is compliant with the original U.S. Constitution and the framers' intent for a federal tax system, whereas the current system we have today required the addition of the 16th Amendment in order to make it constitutional. And perhaps very important to many of us is what is the FairTax in terms of its effect. And that's when we find that it is simple, it is fair, it is neutral on investments, it is visible, it is stable, it is efficient, and we will find that it will least obstruct economic growth. The FairTax is exactly this: a national sales tax that will replace all federal income taxes, all alternative minimum taxes, payroll taxes that we know today in the form of Social Security and Medicare, self-employment taxes, which are paid by those who are self-employed in terms of their Medicare and their Social Security, eliminates capital gains taxes, gift taxes, estate taxes, and very importantly, eliminates corporate taxes. Now the FairTax, how is that going to be assessed? Well, it's going to be assessed on all new products and any previously tax-exempt used product and on all services. It will not be assessed on used products upon which the sales tax was previously paid. So when you go and you buy something from your neighbor, we're going to assume that unless he was selling it to you from a business perspective that he had been using it in, then the tax has been paid, so you'll pay for that item and you'll never have to worry about paying the sales tax. The same would be true if you go to a thrift store, such as with Goodwill. You would not be paying a tax again on the item that you purchased there because it is a used product. The tax rate will be 23% inclusive, 30% exclusive. And what that means is that if we went to the store and we buy an item that costs $1, and that item is inclusive of both the sales tax and the product price, which we call the gross amount when the two are combined, then out of that $1, 77 cents would be the product cost and 23 cents would be the tax. So the 23 cents represents the 23% inclusive rate, while the 30% would be taking the 23 cents tax there and divided it by the 77 cents, and that would give us the 30% exclusive rate that most of us are familiar with state sales taxes. The other thing, too, we'll find with the FairTax is that it has a capability to reduce the sales taxes on life's basic necessities through the payment of a monthly family consumption allowance that in the bill you'll see referred to not only as family consumption allowance, or FCA, but also called a rebate. Those of us in the FairTax community, as most of you are aware, we call that a prebate. And we call it a prebate because it is pretty much paid before the fact. In other words, this allowance has to be provided to those that register for it. Essentially in the bill it says within the first 3 days of each month. And the way you can expect that allowance to come to you is going to be through an EBT type card, where it'll be loaded at the beginning of each month and made accessible to you and to your family if you're other than just an individual. Now, what the family consumption allowance actually does is it provides the same untaxing down to the poverty level that we find today in terms of both our standard deduction that everyone can take, as well as the exemptions that we can take for each member of the family. So what we're doing is essentially with the family consumption allowance is continuing those things, but we do it in a little different fashion. And what we use here in this particular case is the poverty guidelines as as determined by the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, you should be seeing a chart right now that says 2014 Lower 48 FCA. This is one of 3 charts that the FairTax produces to identify what's going to be the guideline and the allowance for families or individuals based on the number of individuals living within a given family unit. Now, to kind of explain what we're seeing here, now I said 1 of 3. The other 2 is one for Alaska and one for Hawaii. Because they have higher cost of livings, there is a separate Department of Human Services guideline for their poverty levels, and we have the same thing in the case of the FairTax. And what we're going to look at here is the Lower 48 FCA guideline. And if we look at this thing, I'm not sure, let's see, there's my arrow. I hope that you can see it. But if we look across at the 4th column where it says 2 persons married FCA guideline. Now, what we've done with our guideline versus what the Department of Health and Human Services has done is we've eliminated in our guideline the marriage penalty that is normally placed when you have 2 adults in a family. They just treat the second adult as another child. Well, in the case of the FCA, that has been changed, and we've removed that marriage penalty. So if we take as an example, again looking in that 4th column, 2 persons married, FCA guideline, and we go from there down to where it says, coming across from the left-hand side, plus 2 persons. Those plus 2 persons represent, in this case, 2 additional or 2 children in the family. Typical family unit in the United States, 2 adults, 2 children. So we'll use that as our example. And we'll see as we bring those 2 together that we end up with an amount, a guideline that says $31,460. Well, that's the guideline that we're going to use to determine what is the family consumption allowance. Now, if we had a family of 4 that went out and spent on taxable items, not used items or putting in savings, but spent on taxable items, $31,460, that included the tax, how much tax would be in that amount of that purchase? Well, we can see immediately to the right under the last column that $31,460 gross amount purchase would have $7,236 total tax in it. Well, if we took that total tax and we divided it by 12 months and say, let's spread out that $31,460 over 12 months, how much tax would they be essentially paying over a 12-month period with that amount of money? Well, it would turn out to be about $603 a month. So what we have in this particular case, this is now identifying to us what is going to be the monthly prebate, the monthly family consumption allowance that will be provided for a family of 4 in which there are 2 married individuals with 2 other persons in the family. In this case, we'll consider it 2 children. So what you will have is you will register with your state administering authority the names of the people in the family and their social security numbers, such that only legal residents of the United States would be able to get the family consumption allowance. Therefore, those that are here illegally would not be able to get this allowance. And how much are they going to get? Every month, their EBT card is going to be loaded up with $603. Now, this does not mean they have to spend $31,460. In fact, the family could only earn $10,000 in a year. But if they're a family of 4, they're going to get $603 every month. If they make $10 million a year, every month, they're going to get $603. That's the way that it works out in this particular case. I hear somebody's mic open. Give me just 1 second to go and find out who that is and make sure we're all muted. There we go. I think that corrected it. We'll come back now. Find the right slide one more time. There we go. And restart our show. Okay, so again, just going back over that, Family of 4, in this particular case, would get $603 every month, and it does not matter what their income is. All they have to do is produce the names and the Social Security numbers to their state administering authority, as we'll learn a little bit more about in just a moment, in order to be able to get that family consumption allowance. And you can go up to the top there, and you can see even what one individual would get. If you look up at one person, the guideline there is $11,670, and they would get every month $224 in this particular case. And that's our family consumption allowance, and that's how we untax us for those basic necessities of life that we typically recognize as food, housing, and medicine. They have very much the same effect that we have today in income taxes in terms of providing the standard deduction and the exemptions that we have per each individual in the family. Now, moving along, the fair tax will not be assessed on business-to-business sales, so we eliminate that embedded tax that we get passed to us each time we buy a product or service today. It rewards businesses with an administration credit in an amount up to 1/4% of the taxes that business collects. Today, when businesses are forced by the government to collect payroll taxes and income taxes and provide this to the government, they're not reimbursed in any way for that. Under the fair tax, they do get a reimbursement as indicated here. It will significantly reduce or eliminate federal taxes embedded in the price of all products and services. And those taxes, again, are going to be income taxes, payroll taxes, and corporate taxes primarily that are going to go away once the fair tax is implemented. It will make domestically produced products more price competitive in both U.S. and foreign markets. And the reason for that is we're taking out those embedded taxes, and we're going to have the tax levied then at the point of sale. And to make it competitive in foreign markets, because there's no business-to-business tax as there is today, then we'll find too that we'll be able to export our products overseas with a lower tax rate, if any at all, in those because of the removal of those federal taxes, thus making our products more competitive overseas. At the same time, when you go down to your local discount store and you look at an imported item on the shelf versus a domestically produced item on the shelf, you're going to find that they have the same tax consequence with a sales tax applied to them, unlike we have today where there's no significant tax consequence on that imported item as there is on the embedded taxes that we have to pay in our domestically produced products. We're going to find, too, that the fair tax will provide the greatest potential for job growth and increased wages and salaries. And that's going to come from the very fact that no more corporate taxes. The United States is going to become a haven, if you will, for retaining the businesses that we have here now, getting businesses to return back to the United States that left this country because of the significant impact from both income, payroll, and corporate taxes, as well as new businesses that are under foreign operation today that will be looking to the United States as a very secure place in terms of our laws and in terms of our great tax system under the fair tax. They will be drawn to come back here or come to here and set up businesses. The fair tax is assessed on all new products and services purchased by any government agency that is not a government enterprise. Now, a government enterprise would be like the post office. They directly sell you a product upon which you pay for that product or that service. The same is true for, say, your public utilities that you may purchase through your city for city water, garbage collection, sewer, and that sort of thing. They will assess, the government enterprise, the tax whenever they provide you the service. In the case of other government agencies, they are non-enterprise agencies, and we'll see in just a moment that they will be assessed taxes in different ways. But one of the things that government agencies will have to do is, because today all governments, when they make purchases of products and services from the public sector, they do so with those products and services containing embedded taxes. Well, those taxes are going to be going away, but we still have a need for that revenue. In other words, too, we need to be able to continue under the fair tax to collect the same revenues after we implement the fair tax as we did before the fair tax. So whenever any government agency that's not an enterprise, as we'll see, other than those providing educational services, when they go out and they buy products and services, they're going to have to pay the tax for that product or service. We're going to see, too, that it's assessed on the payrolls of all federal, state, and local governments, excluding government enterprises and those employees providing direct educational services. Now, when we're talking about assessing the tax on government employee payrolls, again, employees today, they have a certain amount that they, in fact, contribute to the government tax revenues through the taxes that they, in turn, give up, just as we do in the public sector. Those have to be recaptured. Not only that, but government employees are providing a service to the government, which in turn is provided to you. And when they do that, they are prevented from providing a public service, a service as a private enterprise, which eliminates their ability then to be able to sell a product or service upon which we can make taxes or take in tax revenues. So we have a disparity there. And one of the problems we want to make sure that we don't have in the future, as we're starting to get more of today, is more and more things that we see that should be private enterprises are being taken on by the government. And people have the false illusion that doing so is not in some way going to cost us. Well, it does cost us. And one of the ways that we're able to recapture that in the case of government employees is to tax the payroll, not the individual employee, but the payroll of that government entity. It will be assessed the sales tax. Now, it is not assessed on purchases, intermediate sales made by government enterprises that collect the sales tax on the products and services they sell. And again, this goes back to the post office. It goes back to your public utilities, and in any other enterprise in which for the service or the product that you're receiving, you actually pay for it, and in that point in time, then you will pay the tax. And also those agencies will not have their employees I should say their payrolls be susceptible to the payroll tax. And I want to point out, too, going back to the second bullet there, that that payroll tax is not assessed on those government employees providing direct educational services. And interestingly enough, teachers and your professors typically make up the largest sector of employees that we have out there working for us and in our various governments. And because of that, and because of the elimination of the taxes that we have in terms of income, payroll, corporate tax, income and payroll taxes, and particularly the payroll taxes that the employer has to pay, in this case your state government, if they're one of those that do that, then that's eliminated. So you can actually have a reduction in your actual tax costs to various government entities, be they county, be they state, depending upon whom the teachers happen to work for. Now, the FairTax is indexed for Social Security to compensate for any cost of living increases due to the sales tax. So those on Social Security, in addition to continuing to receive your Social Security benefit unaffected, in addition to receiving your COLA, perhaps larger as our economy grows, and also receiving the rebate or the family consumption allowance. The other thing that the bill, and the bill being H.R. 25, provides in the FairTax is a cost of living index or a Social Security index to ensure that any impact from the FairTax being applied to those items that make up the consumer price index from which we determine COLAs in the future will be indexed so that there will be an increase, a consequential increase then in your Social Security benefit in order to compensate for that potential increase from the FairTax, if any. It also allows people now to gift to anyone at any time with no consequential gift taxes. This means those that maybe are fortunate enough to be able to want to pass along a certain amount of money to their children or their grandchildren today. Unlike today, you have a limit on the amount of money that you can pay out before you have to pay an income tax on it, as opposed to the one in receipt of that tax. The giver has to pay it. Well, that goes away with the elimination of gift taxes. It eliminates federal estate taxes and saves family farms and businesses from sales and foreclosures. One of the big killers today of family farms and family businesses is the inability to be able to pass down the family farm or the family business, and then having those inheriting that business be able to pay the taxes, the estate taxes, the inheritance tax on the receipt of that farm. The consequence to that is they may have to sell the farm, or if they planned ahead of time, they may have bought an insurance, which can be very costly, that would have covered taxes. Many times we think of farms maybe with thousands of acres, and yes, they have a lot of land, it's worth a lot of money, but typically they don't have a lot of money in the bank that they necessarily could pay off those estate taxes. So eliminating estate taxes will help save those farms and other family businesses. It will continue to provide tax-free purchases for qualifying not-for-profit organizations. So those that are involved with not-for-profits today, you're going to find that you have very much the same tax advantage under the FairTax that you have under the existing tax structure. It will not be assessed on private education and employment training services, and the reason why it's not going to tax the tuition for training, and it's not going to tax the payrolls of education, public education teachers, is that it's very smartly, the FairTax has very smartly been planned out to say, why would we want to tax something that we want to actually grow and provide a good productive citizen and a good productive worker that is going to be able to produce in the future and be able to provide to those revenues. So let's untax it now. Let's incentivize people to go out there, get education and training in order to be able to get better jobs, potentially with higher wages, such that then they will be able to contribute more through taxes because they'll be able to purchase more. The FairTax offers administration, collection, and enforcement authority to the states as the administering authorities. Now, under the FairTax, what we're going to find, and I think this is a bullet that comes up later on, is the IRS is going to go away, and much of the infrastructure that's required to administer and enforce the FairTax will be pushed down to the state level. And this is keeping in line with what the founders pointed out in the Federalist Papers, that, you know, why be redundant when you can use a single agent, be it the state or the federal government, to collect the tax? Well, they were referring to the state government agencies collecting the tax on behalf of the federal government, which is a very smart idea. It makes it more cost effective and a lot more efficient. But it is voluntary on the state's part. Right now we have 45 of 50 states that have a sales tax already in effect, so it will be a fairly easy transition for them. In the case of the other states, they'll have to create a sales tax structure, perhaps for themselves at the same time that they're producing one for the federal government, or they can neglect, or not neglect, but decline to do it at all, in which case the federal government will step in and execute the administering authority duties. But states that do provide the administering authority, they'll be able to retain, again, 1/4% of all the taxes collected as administration fees for the taxes that are collected in that state. So the federal government is not forcing the states to do this. It is a voluntary basis, and two, they are being reinforced for assisting the federal government in the collection process. It eliminates the IRS, as we said earlier, and creates both a sales tax and an excise tax bureau in the Department of Treasury. No more need for the Internal Revenue Service. In fact, the bill says it's gone within 3 years. And in its place will be a small sales tax that will help administer at the federal level the taxes and then work with the states as far as their administration and enforcement. We'll find, too, that there will be some excise taxes that will continue to exist, and there will be an excise tax bureau that will be set up in the Department of Treasury to handle those that are not specifically handled by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. One of the things nice about the FairTax is it does, within the bill, include a sunset clause that requires the repeal of the 16th Amendment within 7 years, else the FairTax is eliminated. There is such great confidence in the belief that the people will like the FairTax so much that they will really rush to eliminate the 16th Amendment, which gives Congress the ability to tax our incomes as they do today. And we have such confidence in that we have said that if that 16th Amendment is not gone in 7 years, then the bill is saying that the fair tax itself will be eliminated and will be left back with perhaps what we had before. So I think that speaks very strongly for the confidence we have in the fair tax, and our belief too that the people will certainly support the fair tax and want that 16th Amendment gone, so we never again have an income tax like we have today. It will not alter, and this is very important. We talk about eliminating Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes, but I want to make sure that people understand that it does not alter government expenditure programs. It only provides a better means to collect our tax revenues. So Social Security continues as before, Medicare continues as before, all your VA programs, everything that's an expenditure program continues as before, because, again, the fair tax is only how we collect taxes, not how we spend those revenues that we do collect through the government. So it'll be up to the government to decide how they want to treat expenditure programs following the implementation of the fair tax. The fair tax today was introduced to Congress in Bill H.R. 25 and S. 122. Those bills are identical. Typically you'll find bills for revenue under the Constitution, they have to originate within the House of Representatives. Thus, we have H.R. 25. And then it'll be passed to the Senate for their approval. Well, already in the Senate, we have what's called a companion bill, S. 122, and they're titled exactly the same. They're identical documents except for whatever they need on the heading to identify, one for House of Representatives and one for the Senate. And that makes them ready to go for quick passage if Congress will just so do so. Representative Rob Woodall out of District 7, Georgia, sponsored H.R. 25 into the 113th Congress that we have now. And our senatorial sponsor was Senator Saxby Chambliss, who is retiring. And will be replaced by Senator-elect Perdue, and we're very hopeful that he's going to be on board with the fair tax as well. Now, what we're talking about getting rid of here, ladies and gentlemen, is what you see before us. At the bottom, you see the years since the implementation of the fair tax, implementation of income taxes starting back in 1913, when we had only 400 pages to address our tax law. And the form and instruction was only 4 pages long. Today it takes thousands of pages of instruction and produced in both English and Spanish in order to be able to explain our tax code. And you can see how that has grown over the years to 2014, to where today we have some 74,000 plus pages of Internal Revenue Code, rules, and regulations. Just an overwhelming amount of material, and absolutely impossible for any one person to be able to effectively digest, and that's the reason we have so many problems with our tax code, and the reason why we're penalized sometimes because errors are made and we pay more tax than we should, or even the IRS interprets it incorrectly, because sometimes things can be interpreted more ways than one in order to arrive at a satisfactory solution. The fair tax itself, in terms of the bill, both bills again, H.R. 25 and S. 122, are just 131 pages long. And frankly, the meat of those bills are only about 50 pages, as a lot of them are just repeal this or remove that you have in the current tax code, which essentially eliminates subtitles A, B, C, and H. That's income, your payroll, and your corporate taxes that we know today in A, B, and C. And H is removed because that's on your form where you sign that little block that says, I will allow to have $3 to go to the presidential campaign fund. Well, since we don't have income tax forms to sign anymore, there's no reason to have that Part H. And just to give you an idea of the graphics there, that 74,000 pages would be over 11.5 feet tall. H.R. 25, 131 pages. You can easily hold it in your hand and read through it, perhaps within just a couple of hours. Now we're going to pause and we're going to take a few questions here, and while we get things set up again, if you have a question, you may take and raise your hand, and we're going to be looking to see where hands are raised for questions. If you do not have the microphone capability to be able to talk with me directly, then I invite you to write in a question, which we will be happy to try to answer for you as soon as we can get to it here. All right, let's take a look and see who we might have showing up for hands raised. I've got one here. I've got Robert Costanzo. And Robert, I'm going to take you off mute. How do you hear me, Robert? And Robert Costanzo, can you hear me, sir? Robert Costanzo, I have you off mute. Can you hear me okay? Robert, I hear noise in the background, but I'm not hearing you, sir. I'm going to take you back off. We'll look again real quick and see if we have any other hands up at this time. Mr. Turner, Stephen Turner, I am going to take you off of mute. And if you can hear me, Stephen, do you have a question for us this evening?
No, I don't have a question.
Oh, okay. Well, very good then. Well, I will take you back off of mute. And I see Tim Condon has a hand raised. Tim, I've got you off of mute. Let's verify that you're off here.
Did I have my hand raised?
It showed a hand raised, Tim. Do I have Tim?
Yes, you do.
Did you have a question or you didn't, Tim?
No, I do have a question, and I've been thinking about revenue neutrality. Is it accurate to say that the FairTax system that you're pushing would be revenue neutral with the system that exists today?
Absolutely, Tim. In fact, that's one of the requisites in order to be able to push through a new tax proposal, be it a replacement tax or a reform measure. And what you will find is that the economists have gone through in preparation for putting the tax together, and there's a couple of good studies out there, one in particular done by the Beacon Hill Institute that you'll be able to find information about at FairTax.org, where they look to see exactly what tax rate works best. And that's where the 23% inclusive, 30% exclusive came about, and that had to collect the same amount of revenues as we collect today. Now, when I say that, that's the same amount of revenues that you get from each one of those taxes that have been eliminated, be it income, payroll, corporate, estate, and or gift taxes. And each revenue dollar that is received through the sales tax then is divided up, where a certain portion goes to the general fund, where your income taxes go today. Another portion goes to the Social Security fund, and then the other portion will go to the hospital insurance or Medicare fund, as we better know it. So yes, in fact, it will be revenue neutral. And let's take a look at some other questions. Let me take a look and see who may have written in a question. See if I can expand this one so we can see it. One of the questions I have is, how do you deal with knowledgeable people that say it is a good idea but never will be adopted by our congressmen and senators? Well, that is a good question. And that is our struggle today. We've been very fortunate in this last Congress to have the greatest number of co-sponsors and sponsors for both bills that we've been able to attain in any of the Congresses since it was introduced to the first one now well over 10 years ago. Exactly which one escapes me off the top of my head right now. This past Congress, we had 76 sponsors and co-sponsors, as my memory serves me on that, and I believe it was 9 senators that were sponsor and co-sponsor. So those add up to 85. Obviously, we've got a long ways to go in order to be able to get half of each of the houses on board. But the way that we do that is through processes like what we're doing tonight, and that is continuing to educate the public, have them more aware of what the fair tax is and how advantageous it is over the current system or any other proposed income tax, be it flat or marginal. And those people in turn then encourage their representatives, be it your senator, be it your congressman or representative, I should say, encouraging them to support the fair tax. And that's how we're going to get the fair tax push. There's no doubt that the current system serves well to many of the congressmen and how they're able to interact with corporations and lobbyists. And that's one of the things we want to cut off. And I think as we continue to expose just how those what they call milkers and tax extenders and special subsidies and whatnot that Congress makes available and on a temporary basis to our federal government, to our various corporations through their lobbyists. I think as that's exposed more, hopefully they'll step back from that and start looking at the fair tax. So let's see what other questions we may have here. I have one here that says, how would the fair tax affect Social Security entitlements? Well, probably the best thing that we can hope for from the fair tax for Social Security is increasing the amount of revenues in order to be able to keep Social Security viable. Probably most people are aware that Social Security today is operating at a deficit. We only are taking in about 8 to 8.5 cents. About 80 to 85 cents on each dollar that's paid out in benefits. The rest of that comes from the general fund. But in the general fund, it had borrowed $2.6 trillion from Social Security. So the general fund, every time we go to the general fund and use our income taxes and corporate taxes now to pay those benefits that we're no longer receiving enough money from directly from those who are still working, we decrease that debt. But at the same time, in order to pay for those things that we need to pay for out of our general fund, such as defense and education and all those other things that are called discretionary expenditures, we have to borrow. So we just have this big circle, if you will, out there in terms of how we pay for pay for Social Security today. What we must do is expand, or I should say increase and grow our economy. And there is no doubt that the fair tax will have the greatest impact and hold the greatest potential to grow that economy. We know that from the standpoint of giving everyone their money back so that they go and purchase the things that they want to purchase, as opposed to having their money seized from them up front, so that they have more income to be able to purchase and buy the things that they want to buy, or they can save. And when they save, that puts more money into investments and savings that can be used then as loans by businesses in order to be able to grow their businesses, and preferably at a market-driven interest rate. We know, too, that other businesses that have gone overseas and new businesses from overseas will come to the United States, where we can grow those industries in this country, thus creating more jobs, thus creating more workers who are going to be paying more into Social Security, thus providing some relief in the near term. Not guaranteed for the long term. It's going to take some Social Security reform to do that, but certainly provide relief in the near term to be able to continue to pay for our Social Security that the current system just cannot keep up with. Let me take a look at one more here then. Looks like most folks were having a problem with the audio earlier as far as the questions and information that was coming in. So let me see if I can find another question here real quick. Be with you just a moment here. I have a person that's asking the question, how would the fair tax, it says, how does the transition occur from the current tax structure to the fair tax? Well, if we were to pass that law when it was first implemented, we would have been seeing the fair tax coming about in 1 January of next year. Now, if we again introduce the bill, as I'm sure we will in the 114th Congress, what we're going to find then is it'll be reintroduced as the Fair Tax Act of 2015, and you can anticipate at that point in time it would come into effect then in 2017, 2 years later. So this would allow for time for the infrastructure to come together, people to become very familiar then with the new tax law and prepare to transition from the old tax law. And I've had some people tell me, well, how's that going to work as far as at the cash register and showing on the receipt? Well, one of the requirements that the bill actually has is that each cash register receipt, each receipt you receive for any service or any product that you purchase, the bill requires that it show the product price, the tax that was included on that, and the percent that that tax represents. So we're going to find that it's going to be very visible to you. And some people say, well, how is it we're going to be able to just change these software systems over rapidly? Well, we've got several years to do that. If we pass the act, say at the beginning of the next Congress, until it's planned to go into effect 2 years down the road, there's lots of time to make that transition. And going back to the cash register, I don't know about you folks, but I know today whenever I'm handed a cash register receipt, it's about 1 mile long, and it's got all kinds of information, not only on the front side, but on the back side as well. So as far as the transition software-wise, from what you're seeing on your receipt today, what you would be seeing in the future under the fair tax, that is not something that's going to be difficult to overcome at all. And you're going to find that it would be a transition that would occur overnight. We go from the old system immediately to the new system. A great thing for those of you that have tax-deferred investments out there, because once we initiate the fair tax, those tax-deferred investments essentially have amnesty, a word we're going to be hearing a lot over the next few days, essentially have amnesty tied to them in a certain respect, in the sense that you'll no longer owe taxes on those tax-deferred investments. Well, I'm going to have to stop right there so that we can move on to our next item here before we close out for the evening. And that, let me set up my screen here again to be able to do that. It's probably going to close on me one more time, and we'll reopen it. And our topic tonight is going to be the fair tax versus a flat income tax. Now, flat income tax is what I was charged with presenting tonight. I noticed that some of the announcements went out later and said just an income tax. Well, certainly we can draw pretty much the same conclusions with the two. The flat tax maybe being a little bit simpler than the current income tax, but certainly leaving open all the avenues and many of the other to go back to the system we have today and still include many of the taxes that we also continue to have today under a flat tax. And in fact, the way I put this program together is a fair tax versus a flat income tax with payroll, corporate, estate, and gift taxes still included. And the way that I built this program is kind of going back to my days in the military, where we used to use these stoplight graphics to identify, in my particular case as an electronic warfare officer, what jamming program worked best against what type of radar. And you can see on the screen as we open it up here, our top there, our fair tax versus flat income tax. And we're looking at this from the point that we still have payroll taxes, there's still a corporate taxes, estate taxes, and gift taxes included with the flat income tax. Remember, anytime anyone says flat tax to you, they're probably talking in terms of a flat income tax. And unless they say it excludes these other taxes, then we have to assume that they are still separate taxes in addition to whatever the flat income tax may be that Congress decides to impose. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, you're going to see a bunch of green dots and some red dots. And what I've done is I've compared a flat income tax with the fair tax. A green dot means it passes the criteria or it does better than what it's competing with. In this case, you'll notice I obviously have a lot more green dots on the fair tax than I do on the flat income tax. So that means that the fair tax in each one of those cases shows the better prospect of complying with whatever the bullet is that we read all the way to the left. And it may be in some cases that it doesn't even apply to either one of the taxes at any one time. And we'll see that as we go through here. And I've kind of broken these down. We're going to be looking in terms of the nation. We're going to be looking in terms of the individual. We're going to be looking in terms of businesses. And then just real quick, some bullets on Social Security. Now, if we look at the nation, starting with our first bullet up there, we'll see that the fair tax meets the original constitutional intent for federal taxation. It does that because although you pay the tax directly to a cashier, it's still considered an indirect tax. In fact, it is a form of excise tax. It can be implemented without the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which the flat income tax cannot, because typically income taxes include taxes on real and personal properties. And because of that, that's included in rents and whatnot, it requires the 16th Amendment. It restores the greatest degree of financial power to the people. It does in the sense that you're going to receive all that income that was previously seized up front for income and payroll taxes. That's going back to you, so that now you make the decision on when you're going to pay your taxes based upon whether or not you buy a taxable or a non-taxable item, or on the other hand, if you decide to just put it into savings, where in savings it will not be taxed on the dividends and the investment results that come out of that savings and investment program. It will eliminate the IRS and best scale federal oversight. The IRS will be eliminated within 3 years, replaced by a sales tax and an excise tax bureau. It will efficiently and cost-effectively combine state and federal tax collection, like we talked about before, going down to the states to administer and enforce principally the collection of the tax. Revenue amounts are least vulnerable to employment fluctuations. We know that as people gain and lose jobs, then their ability to be able to pay tax on that earned income goes away, whereas there still may be savings that people can spend, so it levels out, if you will, the volatility that we typically see from income taxes alone. It best captures tax revenues from underground and shadow economies. You and I both know that those that are selling drugs, prostitution, whatever the vice may be, they're certainly not collecting taxes for the federal government. But when those same people in the future go and buy a new product or service with that money, they most likely will be paying taxes then for that product or service that they buy with the money that they captured through their vice, in this case, the underground and shadow economy. It best captures tax revenues from foreign visitors. We get over 50 million visitors in this country every year, and one of the great ways to be able to capture taxes from them is to have them then pay sales taxes just as you and I pay sales taxes in this country today, and that will add a tremendous benefit over what we get from income taxes, which they do not pay directly into under the current system. Least vulnerable to frequent tax code changes. Well, we can see that in terms of what we have today. We've grown our tax system today to where there's some 500 changes on average each year, making it impossible for people to keep up with that. And just the size of that versus the size of our bill, only 131 pages, which a lot of that is eliminating the old income tax and implementing the new sales tax, we can see right up front that we're just not going to see that much change. And those of you that live in sales tax states, you know yourselves that there's very little change to the law and very infrequent changes to the amount of tax then that you pay. Best system to attract trillions of dollars from domestic and foreign investors. There is over $30 trillion today that are in both offshore and cross-border countries. This is money taken out of one country and put into another country for reasons of better taxes or better better regulatory control and a law and a security from the laws. The United States having the best system of laws, as far as I'm concerned, in the world today, and with the best corporate and income tax structure, which there will be none under the fair tax, then that is going to be highly attractive to those trillions of dollars that are scattered around the world today in these offshore and cross-border centers to come to the United States, where it'll go in our investment institutions, become money then that can be loaned out for capital growth in this country. Best reduces mutually benefiting politician-lobbyist relations. It goes back to what I was talking about before, those tax extenders and those milkers, as they're called, those temporary tax measures that politicians like to use to their advantage to dangle in front of corporations and lobbyists to say, when that measure comes up for a vote again, you know, what have you done for my congressman lately? Well, those go away under the fair tax, and we eliminate that strong lobbying corporate relationship that we have between our government and the corporate world. Best potential for decreasing and stabilizing inflation rates as we grow our economy, increase our job growth, increase our productivity. That is going to stabilize and potentially decrease any inflation that we have going on as we do today. Best potential to meet U.S. debt obligations, and I put that caveat in there, with responsible spending. You know, in order to be able to get our debt back down to a reasonable level, it's going to require a reduction in the size of government. We can't meet that that debt obligation that we have today. We can't meet the expenditures on a year-to-year basis that we have today simply by changing our tax system. It's going to require the government to spend more responsibly. But certainly with the growth of our economy through the fair tax, we will be able to meet more of those obligations than we project to be able to meet under the current system, or certainly under a flat tax. And you can see in that previous slide then, all of those things, the advantage went to the fair tax. Looking at the individual and going down through these very quickly, for the individual, we can see that the fair tax is the simplest tax system to understand and implement. It eliminates income seizure through federal tax withholding. It eliminates income seizure through payroll tax withholding like we have today. It eliminates that individual quarterly and annual tax filing requirements. And with those then too comes the fact that many people today who get maybe a stock or a mutual fund or something that it's dividends at the end of the year, and they get a lot of income, and suddenly they have to pay a penalty for that. Well, all that goes away under the fair tax, and you don't have to worry about that filing requirement and those penalties from not having paid enough taxes throughout the year. It eliminates individual tax compliant cost. It eliminates tax code imposed tyranny. In fact, one of the things that's included in the fair tax bill is what we call a Bill of Rights that puts the preponderance of evidence upon the government before they can take any action on an individual or business to prove their case. And if they don't prove the case, then there will be financial relief provided to the defendant in this case to cover their attorneys and their adjudication fees. So that's a very important thing. So we're going to be eliminating a lot of that tax imposed tyranny. A maximum 0% tax effectiveness rate for those at or below the poverty level. And you can see they're both green for flat income tax and the fair tax, because they both essentially eliminate taxes for those at the poverty level and below. Best ensures illegal residents pay federal taxes. Today, those can be avoided under the fair tax. When they go and buy an item, they'll be paying taxes. Eliminates multiple taxation on the same income. Today, whenever corporations pay corporate tax and then provide dividends, if you will, to their shareholders, again, they have to pay tax. That's multiple taxation on the same income. That goes away because there's no longer an income tax. There's no longer corporate taxes. Eliminates incentives to be less productive. Went up one there. Eliminates incentives to be less productive because of the special tax credits and things we have today. People want to stay below the poverty line so that they don't get penalized for being more productive, as it says in the next line there. Eliminates penalties for being more productive. Eliminates the need for costly estate planning, something that people have to do today in order to make sure that their heirs get the better part of their estates, or they have to buy or do costly estate planning or buy some sort of a death insurance that will essentially protect their money that's going to be passed down to their heirs through that insurance policy. Eliminates taxes on financial gifts, provides absolute tax visibility to the taxpayer. You're going to know exactly what you're paying for every product that you buy when you see it on your receipt, and it's required that that receipt be provided to you. Therefore, we will have visibility finally in the amount of tax that we're actually paying. Eliminates the need for federal tax exempt or tax deferred investments. No more IRAs, won't need those anymore because there's no taxes on them. Eliminates federal taxation on education and job training, so it encourages job training, encourages people to get out and be more productive so they can make more money and eventually buy more things and contribute more to the revenues. Best reduces potential for non-compliance and tax evasion. There's been a very few studies done on this, but they all point to the fact that income taxes are much easier to evade than are sales taxes, and we expect the same thing to occur in the case of the fair tax. Looking at businesses, we've already talked about, let's say, family farms and businesses from federal estate taxes, where if it continues with the flat income tax in the form of estate taxes, that's not going to be the case. It projects the greatest potential for immediate and sustained economic growth, as we've talked about before. It projects the greatest potential to return jobs back to America. Eliminates government's financial advantages over private enterprise, and that's because government has to pay the tax on items that it buys, and we also have to collect taxes, as will government enterprises, from the products and services that are paid for by the public. And then two, we have the government employee payroll tax that we talked about, but excluding teachers. Eliminates embedded and cascaded taxes to reduce production costs. That's those business-to-business taxes are gone. Eliminates taxes and exports for more competitive foreign market sales. Again, the advantage goes to the fair tax. Best financially positions U.S.-made products for sale in the U.S. because now we've removed those embedded taxes. They're going on the shelf at your favorite department store where you buy things. That domestic-made product up against that import item, and they have the same tax amount on them through the sales tax. Best simplifies the tax compliance for business. We get rid of that huge corporate tax rules and regulation and income taxes and payroll taxes, all these things that businesses have to keep up with today. Those go away, with the exception of your income tax. The amount that you make with your business will still be reported, but no tax paid, and that's so you can continue to accrue credits for your future benefits through Social Security. Best reduces tax compliance cost for businesses. Businesses spend billions, hundreds of billions of dollars every year across the United States trying to comply with business legally or trying to get out of something that they've been told that they did illegally or was not in compliance. So there's going to be a lot less money spent by businesses for accountant fees and the time that's put into accounting for businesses, as well as into legal fees. Eliminates business opportunity losses from tax consequences. What I'm talking about there, and that's really how the fair tax came about, was today when we start thinking about adding on to our business or moving a business into the United States from overseas, if you want to look at it from a foreign perspective, well, what we think about is what's the tax consequence. And because of our focus on the tax consequence and what we think that is going to be, we lose opportunities to expand and grow or introduce new businesses that are completely eliminated with the fair tax because income, payroll, and corporate taxes are in fact gone. Let's see, going on down here, provides, businesses financially, make sure I get the right one here. Credits businesses financially for being tax compliant. That's at 1/4 of 1% they get to keep when they comply with the tax law, as opposed to today or under a flat tax. There's nothing that's going to provide them some sort of an incentive, number one, and two, a reimbursement for complying with federal tax law on behalf of the federal government. Provides consumers the greatest potential discretionary income. People are going to get all their money. Now they will decide where they want to spend their money, thus pay their tax. Unless it's a used item, then there may be no tax due, and or they may save it and thus have no tax on it, and then no tax on the consequential investment, either dividends, interest, capital gains. increases domestic investment and best market-driven interest rates. As we grow the economy, as more money is made available to the banking industry, there's going to be less need for us to have these various things that the Fed does today in terms of quantitative easing and other projects we have going on within our federal government to control our interest rates and thus control inflation. I think we're going to see we'll walk away from that and we'll start moving more into market-driven versus government-driven interest rates. Not-for-profits retain tax relief similar to current tax code is our last one down there. We talked about that before, and you can see they both get a green dot, and that's because they have very similar consequences in that either an income tax or a sales tax will untax the purchases and the things that are bought for use within a not-for-profit business. And lastly, Social Security and Medicare, we're going to find that the FairTax is all green here. It will provide the best prospect for meeting, I want to say, at least our immediate Social Security obligations. There's going to have to be some reform of that in the future in order to be able to keep up with it. It eliminates the regressive effect from a cap on Social Security. Remember that Social Security is only assessed today, if I remember off the top of my head correctly, on the first $117,800, I believe it is, $117,000 some odd dollars of your earned income. Anything above that, then there's no additional payroll tax on. So people that make over that amount, their payroll tax rate then decreases with the amount of money that they make, while those that make under that amount are paying the maximum cap or the maximum for Social Security, and that actually works out to be between you and your employer, or if you're self-employed, about 11.94% of your potential income is going to payroll taxes. Well, with that Social Security cap gone, and it's based only on sales tax, if we have a wealthy individual that goes and buys a multi-million-dollar yacht or goes and buys a multi-million-dollar airplane, be it purchased overseas and returned to this country for consumption or bought here, there's going to be a sales tax on that, and that sales tax will likely be contributing more in revenues to the Social Security trust fund than what they would be contributing through the current income tax structure, or even under a flat income tax where we still have payroll tax with a capital gain. We'll find that the fair tax is going to provide an offset to any increases to the CPI from the sales tax. It'll provide a full monthly Social Security benefit plus the tax rebate as well, and it provides the best best prospect for government to meet its Medicare obligations as well, which today the government, in terms of intragovernmental debt, the general fund, at my last look, I think, owes the Medicare or the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund somewhere in the neighborhood of around $400 billion. And again, we have a case with Medicare and certainly with the Affordable Care Act now coming on board of being able to financially keep up with those under any form of income tax system. Well, folks, we obviously ran over there a bit in terms of 1 hour because of the audio problems we have, and I am afraid we're still having them. But I want to go back now and take a look and see what other questions folks may have. And we will return to looking at our attendees and see if we have any hands up. I see Robert Unterneyer. Robert, I have taken you off of mute. Sir, what is your question this evening? Robert Unterneyer, do I have you, sir? All right, let's go back and, Robert, are you there? All right, let's go back and drop him out. I can see now the difficulties that Larry and Mark go through sometimes trying to follow everything that we have here. All right, we're going to go next to Brian Collard. I believe I have the name correct. Brian Collard, I am unmuting you, Brian. Do you have a question this evening, sir? And I don't hear anything there from
Can
Brian.
you hear me?
Yes, I do. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, what has to happen to get this bill out of committee, and is that what has to happen for the CBO to score it?
What we're going to have in this particular case is for the committee first to take an interest in this bill. We had thought, I think it was early last year, that Representative Camp was going to bring it into committee where we would get an effective scoring on it, and then get a vote in the committee to move it out to the floor. In the interim, though, Representative Camp introduced again another income tax proposal, one that, as I recall, had I think it was 3 overall rates on it. That was introduced, and the fair tax again continued to be set aside. Now, I have to agree with Congressman Woodall that we're still very excited and motivated about the fact that the Congress, and in this particular case the House Ways and Means, is interested still in doing tax reform, and I'm certainly interested in seeing what's going to come up in the next Congress. But what we've got to get is more interest within the Ways and Means Committee to take a look at this bill, to bring it up for debate, to have it properly scored, and then once it's scored, send it to the floor for a vote. And that's what it's going to take. And what that means is us being in contact with those members, too, of the House Ways and Means Committee, and encouraging them to look at this bill. Many of the times we find that some of the committee members just do not have a good knowledge of the bill. And that means that we have to continue contacting those members and the new members that come on board with the next Congress in order that we do get it looked at and we do get it scored, and that we do get it up for debate and out to the floor. And I hope I answered your question, Brian. Let me look next, see who we might have here. We will run probably about another 10 minutes here, folks, before we check out. So if we have any questions raised. Unfortunately, it takes me just a moment to scroll through and find folks and make sure that I have them. I'm looking now at Loretta Daly. Loretta, do I have you up? You are off mute. Okay, I don't have Loretta. We'll go back and mute. Looks like a lot of folks have maybe gone to the question section, so let's go back down to questions and see what we have there that I can address. One person asked, is there a fair tax lobby in Washington, D.C.? No, there is not per se a fair tax lobby. Fair tax recently reorganized into another 501c4, I believe is the correct designation, a nonprofit organization, still under the banner of Americans for Fair Taxation. And still at this point in time, much of what you'll find with respect to the fair tax and its advocates are individuals like myself and many of those that are online tonight that see the fair tax as probably the most advantageous measure that we could pass today that would grow this economy and solve a lot of the problems that we have in the nation today through the added benefits that come with the fair tax. So no, we do not have a specific lobbying group, but we certainly do have a strong and growing grassroots movement and an organization, of which there are others in other states. Georgia has its own fair tax organization. Florida, of course, has the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association, all working to educate Americans to the advantage of the fair tax and encouraging them to contact their congressman. Let me take a look and see what other questions we may have here. I have a question here. Let's see. When talking about a married couple has a parent or guardian living with them, Will that be a plus one person? Yes, it would be. What it talks about in terms of the bill, in terms of a household to be able to get the family consumption allowance, any members of the hierarchy of the family, whether it be great-grandparents down through grandparents, parents, and down to the children of the parents in the family, only one set of married people within that family can be acknowledged as the two married units within a family. The other married individuals or adults that are in the family then would be considered as an additional plus person, and the consequence then would be the same as with a child. Now, interestingly enough, you can have the rebate paid out to more than one person, but the other person that it goes to, I believe the requirement is they have to be over 18 years of age. So you could actually have the rebate if you wanted to split it up in the family, going to separate electronic banking cards or EBT cards. Look again here. Somebody asked, if I buy a computer for my business, will I have to pay the fair tax, the sales tax? The answer is no. If you have a business and you have registered that business, and this is talked about within the bill itself, your business is registered, you'll be able to use your registration certificate when you go and buy that computer from the retailer, show that to them, and you will not have to pay the tax. Or if you forgot your registration certificate, this is what a lot of states have today in terms of their sales tax for not-for-profits. They recognize that not-for-profit certificate, so they don't charge them the sales tax. So you can avoid paying the tax right up front, or if you don't have that certificate with you, then you can pay the tax at that point in time, and when you file your monthly report to report your revenues, your business revenues, and thus your tax revenues, you can take a credit then at that time in order to be able to get the money or the taxes back that you paid for that computer.